You not only forced our son to do household chores and child rearing, but now you're after our money too? Get out of this house, you leeching lazy bum only bringing in $700. I broke into a cold sweat as my mother-in-law pointed a knife at me and shouted. I was heartbroken. After all, I was doing all the work and taking care of the kids in place of my jobless husband. I had reached my breaking point. I abandoned the chores, grabbed my child, and decided to head back to my parents' house. My name is Emily, 23 years old, living with my husband, our child, and my mother-in-law. My husband Richard was a senior at my high school, an ace of the soccer team and the admired student president. He was the object of everyone's admiration. When he returned to our hometown after getting a job, he approached me, and I was taken aback. After a few dates, we began a serious relationship. Even as an adult, he was my handsome, brag-worthy boyfriend. After I graduated from a vocational school, I found out I was pregnant. The order was a bit off, but I believed I could have a happy life with my child and Richard. My hopes were shattered during a conversation about life after marriage.
How about we live in my parents' house after we get married?
Why? I would like it to be just the three of us with our child.
That's going to cost a lot, isn't it? If we live in my parents' house, we don't need to worry about money.
If we both work, we can afford an apartment, right?
Well, about that, my income this month is pretty bad.
How bad?
Less than $1,000.
What? Why so low? You said you were working at an IT company.
Actually, I quit. Now I'm making money at the casino and working part-time.
Casino? Why on earth would you do that? Apparently, he quit his job after just 1 month.
If you're willing to cover all the expenses, I'm fine with living in an apartment.
His detached tone made me anxious, wondering if I was the only one excited about our new life. Seeing my concern, he held both my hands tightly.
It's just until I find another job. I'll make you happy, Emily. I'll do all the housework and child rearing until then.
Believing in his words, we got married. We started our life in his parents' house. After safely giving birth, I resolved to work hard for my son. Both Richard and my mother-in-law seemed happy, and I was looking forward to our future life together. However, even after the birth, Richard didn't do any housework or child rearing, spending his days at the casino. Off to the casino again? What about the housework and child rearing? When I pointed out his broken promise, Richard suddenly yelled back at me.
Don't you dare tell me what to do.
Confused about why I was being yelled at, mother-in-law showed up, having heard the commotion. What's all this noise?
Oh, it's just that I'm busy with work and she's asking for help with housework and child rearing.
What? That's a wife's job. Richard hadn't told mother-in-law he quit his job. He portrayed me as the worst wife, pushing housework and child rearing onto him. Mother-in-law, initially kind, started hating me after buying into Richard's story. Richard continued his part-time work and casino visits. Though he only earned about $700, he would ambitiously go to the casino, aiming to double it, but ended up losing everything. I paid most of the living expenses. Consequently, our life became tough without me working. So I started working again after leaving our son at a childcare center. Thankfully, my qualification as a dental hygienist landed me a job pretty quickly. But every day when I got home from work, I was met with my mother-in-law shouting, "What time do you think it is? This isn't playtime. You're a parent, yet all you do is frolic around. Get to making dinner now." In her frustration, mother-in-law slammed the newspaper she was holding onto the floor. She had a habit of lashing out at things, sometimes going as far as smashing plates when she got really angry. My mother-in-law was the explosive type. Her attitude would shift at the slightest annoyance. The fear of not knowing what she might do next kept me submissive. But between caring for my young son, working, and doing housework every day, I was mentally and physically drained. I couldn't take it anymore, so I decided to talk to Richard again. I caught him early in the morning before he left for the casino. "Listen, I am at my limit. You could help out with our kid a little, couldn't you?"
What? Like I said, I'm busy. I'm preparing to get a new job. You understand, right? Would you rather I stay unemployed forever? You'd be in trouble then, huh? The father of your child, jobless. If you don't like it, just do as you're told.
But we are barely scraping by as it is. I am covering all our food costs with my savings, you know. Do you have any idea how much diapers cost? You say you're earning at the casino, but you never give us any money. Our living expenses were mostly covered by my money. Mother-in-law used to pay for utilities, but recently she started asking for $500 a month, so I was dipping into my savings. Even the food costs were coming out of my savings and my money was running out fast. All I had was money saved from a part-time job I had when I was a student.
Enough. The nerve of you to talk back. You have a lot of nerve to say such things after you moved into my house.
Richard was usually very kind. However, when it came to money or casino-related issues, his attitude changed drastically. Hearing Richard shouting, mother-in-law entered the room. What now? Is your wife complaining again?
Yeah, she is. She's telling me to do housework and childcare, and to pay for living expenses on top of that.
What a brazen woman you are. Richard, you should go to work.
Thanks, I'll be going.
With that, Richard left. As soon as Richard was out of sight, mother-in-law's gaze sharpened. You have got some nerve. Pushing childcare and household work onto us and demanding money. You should be ashamed. It's not like that. I'm not making demands. It's just that, without a little help, life is really tough. You must be wasting it. Are you careless with money? Mother-in-law didn't understand the situation at all. She didn't know that her own son was unemployed and spending all his time at the casino. I was told to keep quiet, but I was at my wit's end. Do you know that Richard isn't bringing in a single cent? He's unemployed because he quit his job. What are you saying? Richard has always been excellent. He might have failed his college entrance exams, but he got a job at a reputable company. He quit that job after a month. He's always at the casino now. I can't survive on my savings alone. That's ridiculous. Stop talking nonsense. Mother-in-law refused to believe me. Her son, who had always excelled in sports and studies, was her pride and joy. She couldn't bear the thought that he was now unemployed and wasting his days at the casino. Her face red with anger, mother-in-law stormed out of the room. When she came back with a heavy stride, to my surprise, she was holding a knife in her hand. What are you planning to do? Please stop it. I back away, lifting my son into my arms. Mother-in-law is slowly closing the distance between us, knife raised high. She brings the tip of the knife to my throat. Enough of your insults to my son. Having a wife like you is ruining Richard. You're a lazy parasite living off a measly $70,000. Get out of this house. Her harsh words make me break into a cold sweat. The slightest movement could cause the blade to harm my son. Seeing my silence and my pale face, mother-in-law seems satisfied and lowers the knife. Good, you understand. Parasites like you are not wanted anywhere. Just stay quiet and do your housework. She throws these words at me before returning to her room. Released from the tension, I collapsed onto the ground. Sensing something wrong, my son started to sob. As I stroked his back, I made a decision. We can't live in this house any longer. It's unbelievable that someone would threaten with a knife so casually. She doesn't even seem human. Up until now, I have been swayed by Richard's sweet words. After every shouting match, I used to think that I needed to support him, that he would fall apart without me. But I have reached my limit. Above all, my most powerful thought was that I had to protect my crying son in my arms. I can't raise my son in this house. I decided to leave. The next day, a stern-faced mother-in-law speaks to me in the morning. Emily, please prepare for my husband's memorial service next week. All our relatives will be there, so make sure everything is perfect. She leaves for a neighbor's house without waiting for my reply. Next week is my father-in-law's memorial service. Richard and mother-in-law had been talking about ordering a grand feast and sharing memories of father-in-law. I have been tasked with all the preparation, but I am not listening anymore. As soon as Richard and mother-in-law are out, I hastily pack my things and flee the in-laws' house. I don't have much, just my clothes, my son's toys, and diapers. When I get back to my parents' house, they're surprised. But when I tell them everything, my mother is moved to tears and holds me tight. My usually calm father is very angry and tells me to rest at home. Then, that evening, the phone rings. It must be Richard, wondering why I haven't returned to make dinner. I ignore the call and block his number. The next day, mother-in-law and Richard show up together at my parents' house. They're banging on the door early in the morning. My parents try to drive them away, but I tell them to let them in. When I open the door, they start shouting immediately. How dare you leave without a word? What kind of wife are you?
Don't you think it's strange to leave without saying anything?
Can you please not shout? You're disturbing the neighbors. I keep my voice calm, suppressing the urge to say who's the real problem here. When they see my attitude, they try to grab me, but my father steps in.
We will call the police if you resort to violence. Let's talk inside first.
With my parents present, I started the conversation with mother-in-law and Richard.
Why did you leave without saying anything?
I had reached my limit. Housework, childcare, and my job all overwhelming me, and yet you never lifted a finger to help, despite my pleas.
Well, I was busy too.
Busy at the casino? Like I've already said, our son doesn't go to casinos. Stop spreading lies. It seemed like the mother-in-law still thought Richard was working. It's unthinkable because he's such a good son. She must think like that. Ignorance is bliss. So, mother-in-law, where do you think Richard is employed? At a securities company. I saw the job offer letter after all. Well, we should call them and find out if Richard is still there. That would settle it.
What? Wait a minute.
Richard was obviously flustered. What's the problem? If you're working there, it shouldn't be an issue.
Well, that's,
Ignoring the visibly sweating Richard, I dialed a securities company on my phone. I switched the call to speaker mode so everyone could hear and asked if Richard was working there.
That individual resigned several years ago. If memory serves me right, he was with us for just about a month.
What? The words from the phone left mother-in-law speechless. Richard was looking down, his fist clenched. Did you really quit? Why?
Because it was frustrating. Every day was just grunt work and the boss would yell at me for the smallest mistakes. That's harassment.
Richard, why don't you tell us what you've been doing since?
I'm, job hunting.
How many years have you been job hunting? You don't seem to be getting any offers. Tell me how many companies you have applied to so I can verify.
Well, there aren't any good job offers. When a good company comes along, I'll get a job.
You seem to have a lot of confidence in yourself, by the way. You're working part-time now, right? How much did you make last month?
700?
700? Didn't you tell me that Emily could only earn 700 and couldn't support herself? So you were the one supporting her? Apparently, he told mother-in-law that I wasn't earning anything, but the reality was quite the opposite. As a dental hygienist, my salary isn't huge, but I earn at least $2,000. Knowing the truth, mother-in-law was blushing furiously as she glared at Richard. In that situation, Richard became extremely angry.
Why do you have to do this? This is all your fault, making me look like a fool.
Seems like his pride was hurt and he couldn't stand being embarrassed, so he hit the table hard.
You shouldn't reveal things like this in public. It's defamation.
I sighed in disbelief. If you want to sue, go ahead. But I'll sue you for threatening me with a knife too. Besides, lawsuits aren't free. Do you have the money? At that, Richard clicked his tongue. He probably spent all his earnings for this month at the casino. As mother-in-law was in shock, after learning the truth about Richard's unemployment, I laid it out for her. I am the one earning all our living expenses. When we got married, Richard said he would take care of housework and childcare in place of my job. But after we married, he did none of it. That's different from what I heard. Mother-in-law just went ahead and trusted whatever Richard told her, right? She got upset when I asked for help with the chores and childcare. She even pointed a knife at me and told me to keep quiet and do my housework. I could see my mother-in-law's face turning pale. Standing in front of my parents being called out for her misconduct, she looked uncomfortable. Mother-in-law, you haven't contributed a penny to the household either. We have been living on my income this whole time. I have no intention of working for you any longer. So I would like a divorce, please.
Divorce? Hold on a second. Don't just drop that bombshell all of a sudden.
Yes, that's right. I'll help out too, so please come back. No, thank you. When I made my stance clear, their eyes widened in surprise. They were likely startled because I, who had always acquiesced after being yelled at or persistently begged, had clearly refused this time. I don't want to live with a person who threatens me with a knife just to get their way. I'm tired of living with Richard, who does nothing but gamble at the casino all day. I am going to make sure you pay me compensation for all the hard work I have put in so far, as well as child support."
No way! That's going to be a problem. I can't possibly afford to pay that much.
"Well, then quit gambling right now and start paying."
But there is no way I can do that. I don't have a job.
I was appalled by Richard's stupidity. "You don't have a job because you're too picky about what work you do. Don't you have any desire to do whatever it takes? There aren't many companies out there that would hire someone without any significant qualifications or work experience. Don't take society for granted. Many people are out there working their hardest in difficult situations to earn a living. Yet people who quit their jobs at the drop of a hat because they got angry or didn't enjoy their work, no one's going to want to hire them. He keeps saying he'll find a job someday, but there is no way he will manage it at this rate. I'll contact you through my lawyer about the divorce proceedings. Please do not contact me at all from now on." What kind of selfish... What's going to happen to us? At my curt words, mother-in-law flared up in anger. I made a deliberately puzzled face and responded to mother-in-law's words. "I don't know. Earn a living on your own? You heartless woman." Heartless? I don't want to be called that by you, remember? When you said, "The parasite living off a measly $700 per month is a nuisance? Leave my house?" Do you remember saying that to me, your daughter-in-law, while holding a knife to my throat? By the way, the lazy person making $700 a month is right next to you. Are you not telling him to leave? As I spoke, mother-in-law started shaking with rage. Maybe I went too far. Mother-in-law leaned over and grabbed my collar.
Stop it. I told you. I will call the police if you lay a hand on her.
My father forcefully pulled her off of me, but she was too riled up. So not only threats with a knife, but physical violence too? How barbaric. Don't you think it's better not to compound your crimes any further? Mother-in-law glared at me resentfully. Ignoring my mother-in-law, I turned my gaze to Richard. I believed he would change, but I'm giving up on that now. I need to protect our son.
I won't trouble you anymore. I'll take care of the money, the housework, and the childcare, so please come back.
You will take care of the money? Really? Even with careful budgeting, it's over $1,000 a month. Can you earn that? Upon hearing my words, Richard's face turned pale. He had never made more than $1,000 since he quit his job.
But I have mom's pension.
What? So you're telling me you're dependent on my pension now? Even my mother-in-law couldn't keep her calm at his absurd words.
There's nothing else I can do. I don't have a job now. I'm doing part-time work. Can't we try to work things out?
My father, hearing Richard's unyielding stance, finally spoke up.
Richard, you and your mother have taken great advantage of our precious daughter. If I had known you were such a person, I would have opposed the marriage by all means. I will never let her step foot in your house again. I'll sever all ties. But I can't live without Emily. Please, give me another chance. Don't joke with me. Can't live without our daughter? You're already planning to depend on her, a man who has no intention or grit to earn his own living and make his wife's life comfortable doesn't deserve our daughter. Leave now.
For the first time, I saw my father shout. It sent chills down my spine. Richard and mother-in-law's too. Richard was kneeling, his head bowed. It was a comical sight. The charming image I had of him during our college days was completely gone.
Please reconsider. I beg you, Emily.
But my parents wouldn't budge. They were fed up. I don't want to be treated like a slave by you two anymore. Please don't involve me in anything from now on. As soon as we kicked them out of the house, we locked the door. For a while, they banged on the door and shouted, but as soon as a police officer passing by addressed them, they ran off. After that, I heard Richard was cut off by his mother and kicked out of the house. Now he's living in a rundown apartment, surviving on welfare and part-time work. Apparently, because of his short temper, he doesn't stick to one job for long and keeps switching between part-time jobs at convenience stores, construction sites, and so on. He's barely making ends meet in order to pay me compensation and child support. He's juggling multiple part-time jobs and is unable to look for a full-time job. There were rumors that he's still going to the casino and even in debt, but I'm not interested. The word about Richard's downfall spread quickly among our high school classmates, and I received numerous sightings and informations about him. It seems that the neighbors have witnessed mother-in-law kicking Richard out, and their frequent arguments. His unemployment and the fact that he was left by his wife became public knowledge. She must be feeling extremely embarrassed after boasting about her son all the time. She hardly ever leaves the house now. With the help of my parents in doing the housework and raising my son, I continue working. I now have more free time to spend with my son. I don't need to leave him at the childcare center since my parents take care of him, so everything has been great. I wish I had divorced sooner. From now on, I'm going to cherish the time I spend with my son and watch him grow up closely.
My name is Harper. I'm 28 years old and run a leather shop. I married Lucas, a customer who ordered a wallet for my workshop 4 years ago. We have 3 children, Oliver, 14, and Mason, 12, Lucas's sons from a previous marriage, and Noah, our 3-year-old. Lucas owns a pizzeria. I heard his first marriage didn't work out due to his ex-wife's infidelity. I don't regret marrying him, but I'm really struggling with his 2 older boys. They just haven't been taught basic manners. Things like table manners and folding their clothes neatly. I've tried teaching them, but they don't listen, not seeing me as their mother. Thankfully, there's no sibling rivalry, as they both adore our youngest, Noah. Oliver and Mason eat a lot, so it's helpful when they play with Noah while I'm cooking. But beyond that, they seem to harbor some hostility towards me. Their speech and thought patterns are just like their father, Lucas. I thought I was marrying a reliable leader before our wedding, but he became more commanding after we tied the knot. He must have always been self-centered. Since Lucas talks to me in such a manner, the kids probably think it's acceptable. Lucas comes home late, so the kids eat dinner before him. I'm teaching Noah how to use a fork and spoon, but Oliver and Mason complain about it.
Noah, you don't need to learn the correct way. As long as you can eat, it's fine.
That's right, you can't eat like me with any style. This makes it hard for Noah to practice. For Noah, holding it correctly looks cooler. In private, I encourage him, and we continue practicing slowly. However, the one thing the kids look forward to is Parents' Day at school. They seem proud to have a young mom. They check what I'll wear and how my hair will be styled for Parents' Day. After it's over, they wait for me and make a show of our close relationship, but in a soft voice.
We call you Mom, but we don't consider you our mother,
they always say. I reply, okay, I'll keep trying until you accept me. I plan to raise them equally with Noah. Lately, Oliver, maybe in his rebellious phase, seems to disdain me, almost like he sees me as a servant. I feel a growing distance between us. Initially, I tolerated it, as typical teenage behavior, but it became too much, so I talked to Lucas. Hey, Oliver's defiance is getting out of hand.
Am I supposed to do something about it?
He replied, showing his usual disinterest. Frustrated by his attitude, I still insisted he take it seriously, as it's about his son and our family. Tired of my talk, Lucas said,
I'm going to bed,
and tried to leave. I quickly told him about Oliver's behavior. When I try to eat with him,
don't come near me. Don't talk to me,
he says. He also tells me,
I have a real mom, so stop acting like one.
And Mason copies him, which hurts. Lucas just nods while looking at his phone. Listen to me and think about it, I insisted.
I am listening. Stop nagging. You're worrying about this shows you're not a real mom. If you think you're a mother, figure it out yourself. Parenting is a mother's job, right?
Parenting is a responsibility of both parents. Lucas clicked his tongue and said,
You make this home uncomfortable. I come home tired and need relaxation. Maybe you should let their real mom take them.
As he headed to the door, I asked where he was going.
To my woman's place. You knew, right?
Are you cheating? I asked.
You didn't know? How much do you trust me? You're so naive.
He laughed, then left. That only added to my confusion and worries. Lucas didn't come back after that. Oliver and Mason continued their defiance. I searched online for how to deal with rebellious teens and tried to avoid the listed don'ts. Don't react to every reaction. Keep a watchful distance. I stuck to these. While working in my workshop, I pondered what to do about Lucas and the boys. Noah, our youngest, has become increasingly clingy, uneasy about the changing environment and reluctant to go to childcare. One evening while cooking dinner, Oliver and Mason approached me.
We heard her dad say our real mom wants to take us back.
Dad said that? I don't know. Then Mason, looking happy, said,
Big brother contacted Dad and arranged to meet our real mom today, so we don't need the dinner you made. We're going to our real mom's place. You're pitiful, abandoned by both Dad and us.
I wanted to respect Oliver and Mason's desire to meet their real mother, but I mentioned they needed Lucas's approval.
Dad said to decide after meeting our real mom. We'll eat tonight and leave with our stuff tomorrow.
I realized that Lucas, Oliver, and Mason had already discussed this.
You're pitiful, abandoned by both Dad and us.
Deeply hurt me. And so, Oliver and Mason left to meet their real mom. The repeated mention of our real mom made me lose all confidence as a mother. Hours later, they returned, seemingly overjoyed from their meeting, too excited to even notice Noah talking to them. They were so excited about their mothers that they could not hear Noah when they spoke to each other, and they began to pack their bags. I asked Oliver, "Are you going to live with your mom? When will you come back?" Perhaps my question hit a rebellious nerve, as Oliver ignored me. Mason said,
Mom wants to live with us. She'll ask Dad to let us stay with her forever. Goodbye.
I contacted Lucas, likely living with his affair partner, to ask if he knew and consented to the boys living with their mother. Lucas revealed that his ex-wife had long wanted the kids back, and he thought it was best to let them choose. Feeling everyone involved wanted this, I told Lucas. "Understood," I said. When I spoke to Lucas after a long time, he was calm. I wanted to confront him about living with his affair partner and our future. Lucas' response was,
Oh, I was planning to come home and talk about this. I'm living with her now. She's pregnant, so I'm taking responsibility. Let's get divorced.
"Pregnant? Divorce?" I was overwhelmed by loneliness. My cherished family had long been broken. To Lucas, Oliver, Mason, and even their mother, I was just disposable. My mind went blank, tears uncontrollably flowing. I had considered overlooking the affair for the kids, but a pregnancy was too much. Realizing I was unloved in this marriage, my heart ached. For hours, my memory was a blur, filled with tears. I tried to stand, but my ears rang, muffling all sounds. Thankfully, during this time, Noah had stayed by my side, asleep holding my hand. I tucked Noah into bed and checked Oliver and Mason's room. They had left early, unable to wait till tomorrow. Longing for my brother Robert's voice, I called him. Robert had opposed my marriage to Lucas till the end. I expected reprimand.
That's why I opposed to it back then.
But just wanted to hear his voice. I broke down before Robert even answered. When he did, I couldn't speak through my sobs. Sensing something, Robert said he'd come over. I couldn't bear being alone, and waited for him at the door. Robert, living nearby, arrived in about 10 minutes, bringing lots of beer.
When you're upset, drinking's the best,
he said, putting his arm around me and leading me inside. He went into the kitchen, checked the fridge, and started cooking with what was available.
Stop crying before the food's ready. You'll make everything too salty,
he joked, trying to cheer me up. Noah woke up, delighted to see his favorite uncle. Robert's cheerful nature makes him beloved by everyone, from kids to the elderly. Reflecting, I realized Robert's opposition to my marriage might have been because he saw Lucas's true nature, Thanks to Robert, I stopped crying and regained some calm. Robert brought the food and beer to the table. He told me to sit across from him, so I did. Noah naturally sat on Robert's lap, being affectionate. I realized I hadn't made Noah this happy or seen him smile like this recently. Feeling guilty for always trying to please Lucas, Oliver, and Mason, I blamed myself for that. Robert said,
"Have you eaten anything today? You haven't, right? No excuses. Eat."
He waited for me to eat. I tried a bite of Robert's cooking and was surprised at how delicious it was. Noah also said it was tasty and ate more than usual. Before I knew it, my son and I had finished everything. After we ate, I finished the dishes while Robert played with my son. When I joined them, Noah was sleeping peacefully on Robert's lap. After putting my son to bed, Robert sat next to me on the sofa.
"So what happened? Tell me,"
and asked. I told him everything that was in my heart, and he listened intently, nodding. After I finished, Robert asked,
"Is that everything?"
"That's what I hear." "Yes," I replied.
"Harper, since you got married, the only happiness you've had is Noah's birth, right? And the only fun, his growth. How about Noah, seeing his mom unhappy? Let's think about Noah's happiness together,"
he said. Then we toasted with beer, laughed, cried, and got angry. With Robert's help, I decided to move forward. When I woke up in the morning, I was in bed with Noah. Robert had made breakfast for Noah and me before leaving a letter behind. The letter read,
"Harper, keep protecting Noah. I'll keep protecting you. Get ready to move."
After reading the letter, I slowly talked to Noah. "Your brothers and dad are gone, so you and I will move." Noah understanding something even at 3. "I'm okay, as long as I'm with Mom." We decided to prepare for the move together and took the day off from childcare. We packed up our few belongings and, with Robert's help, completed the move using his car. The new location is on the 2nd floor of the workshop. The new home was above the workshop, which was a renovated part of my late parents' house, with the 2nd floor unused. Robert suggested and helped execute the move there. After settling in, I informed Lucas I agreed to the divorce. Lucas seemed relieved and cheerful. "I'm taking only Noah. Just need child support for him," I said. Lucas, already having plans for Oliver and Mason, didn't object. He agreed to pay a lump sum for alimony and Noah's child support. I told him I'd sign the divorce papers after confirming the deposit. His pizzeria, popular for its all-you-can-eat and drink, was profitable, so he transferred the agreed amount quickly. I met Lucas at a cafe, signed for the divorce papers, and submitted them to the court together. Lucas wanted to ensure I really filed for divorce. After submitting the papers, we parted ways, with Lucas in a good mood. I returned to the workshop and worked until it was time to pick up Noah from childcare. I was able to focus on work for the first time in a while. At childcare, I was relieved to hear from the teacher that Noah seemed unchanged. Our life as a twosome at home began, with Noah as cheerful as always. A week into our new life, Oliver called.
"Hey, why aren't you here? I'm hungry. Come back and make dinner. You don't do housework without us."
Confused, I said, "What? I'm not coming back. Didn't Dad tell you?" Oliver, unaware.
"I'll call Dad, then I'll call you again."
He said he'd call back after talking to Dad. I wondered why Oliver and Mason, supposedly with their mother, were at our old house, but decided not to dwell on it, as they were no longer my concern. A few hours later, Oliver called, asking me to meet at a cafe. At first, I'm not going. However, he said that if I didn't come, he would come to the workshop. So I reluctantly decided to head to the cafe. When I arrived at the cafe, Oliver, Mason, and Lucas were already there. I remained standing. "What business?" I asked. Then there was Oliver.
"I heard what you said. I'm going too."
Mason nodded and seemed to be waiting for my response, but I decided to summarize the incident. "You're living with your mother. You went to the house we used to live in together. You called me to make food because you were hungry. I told you to ask Dad why I'm not there, and you called him. You called me to this cafe. Is that okay? So, what's the reason? I asked, and Oliver started to tell this story rapidly. They lived with their mother, but she dumped all the housework on him and Mason and did nothing herself. Sometimes her boyfriend would come over, making them feel uncomfortable. They were told not to go to high school, but to work and contribute money to the house immediately. Regretting their decision, they ran away from their mother's house and returned to their old home, only to find it messy with laundry, dishes, and trash everywhere, leading him to call me in frustration. He called his dad, as I suggested, and learned about our divorce for the first time. Lucas said,
Your mother hasn't changed, but you two wanted to live with her, right?
Oliver got angry at Lucas for not telling them about their mother's true nature, saying he wouldn't have left if he had known. Lucas laughed at Oliver's anger.
My current wife hates housework too, and it's a disaster.
Oliver then turned to me and said, We'll live with you then. I laughed and replied, No way, you guys have changed your surname, haven't you? Didn't you know? Oliver was stunned. Well then, there's nothing more to talk about, so I'm going home. When I tried to leave, Lucas said something unbelievable.
Let's go back to the original family. Harper, you and the boys can come back. I'll kick out my current wife, since she's unfit.
Oliver and Mason looked at me expectantly, waiting for my answer. After sighing, I said, I only need Noah as my family. Remember what you did to me? Can you really say that after recalling everything? Who would want to return to that hell? And finally, with more anger than I expected, I said, Enough of your jokes. Now it's my turn to leave you behind. I left the cafe. As the door closed behind me, I heard the sound of glass breaking, Oliver's yelling, and Lucas shouting,
Stop!
I didn't look back and went home. Since then, I've had no contact from Oliver or Lucas, and I'm living happily with Noah. I asked the cafe owner what happened after that incident. The police came due to the family fight, and both father and son were taken away. The owner billed them for damages and got paid. I also learned about Lucas, Oliver, and Mason's current situation. Lucas apparently cheated again and left home. He ran his business poorly, causing food poisoning, and had to close down. Oliver and Mason went back to their mother. Lucas's new wife, who was after his money, disappeared when the money ran out. Her pregnancy was a lie. Thinking about how I was once part of such a troubled family makes me shudder. I could only be grateful to Robert for rescuing us. Thank you, Robert.
I'm Hannah, and I met John in college, and we clicked instantly. He was charming, funny, and ambitious. We got married right after graduation and started building our life together. When our daughter Sophie was born, I was over the moon. I poured all my love and energy into raising her, determined to give her the best start in life. I believed in setting boundaries and instilling discipline. Knowledge is power, I'd always tell her. Study hard and you'll go far. John, on the other hand, had a different parenting style. He'd shower Sophie with gifts, buy her sweets, and let her get away with things I wouldn't. "Come on, Hannah," he'd say. "Let her be a kid." It bothered me, but I figured we balanced each other out. As Sophie grew older, it became clear she was a daddy's girl. She'd run to John with her problems, laugh at his jokes, and light up when he came home from work. With me, it was all eye rolls and yes, mom in that tone teenager's perfect. I'd bite my tongue, reminding myself that Sophie would understand when she was older. She'd see that my strict approach came from a place of love. But even at 17, Sophie remained firmly in her father's camp. It stung, but I consoled myself with the thought that I was doing right by her in the long run. Despite these small frustrations, I considered myself fulfilled. I had a successful career at a respected clinic, a husband who still made me laugh, and a daughter who, despite our differences, I adored. Life was good, or so I thought. Everything changed on a crisp autumn day. I was doing laundry, a mundane task I'd done 1,000 times before. As I emptied John's coat pockets, my fingers brushed against a piece of paper. I pulled it out, expecting a grocery receipt or a dry cleaning ticket. Instead, I found myself staring at a receipt from an upscale perfume store. The perfume listed was an expensive brand I'd never wear. Too floral, too sweet. John knew I preferred subtler scents. I stood there, the washing machine humming in the background, as 1,000 possibilities raced through my mind. Was it a surprise gift? But my birthday had passed, and our anniversary was months away. Was it for his mother? But she was allergic to most perfumes. With shaking hands, I took a picture of the receipt with my phone. Then, carefully, I placed it back in his pocket. I needed time to think, to process this information without jumping to conclusions. That evening, when John was in the shower, I checked his coat again. The receipt was gone. I kept my discovery to myself, not breathing a word to John or Sophie, but now that my eyes were open, I couldn't stop noticing things. It was like a fog had lifted, revealing a landscape I didn't recognize. John's late nights at work weren't new, but now they felt different. "Big project, honey," he'd say, kissing me on the cheek as he left. "Don't wait up," I'd nod and smile, all the while wondering who he was really meeting. His new haircut caught my attention too. He'd always been particular about his appearance, but this was different. Younger. Trendier. When I complimented him, he shrugged it off. Thought I'd try something new. The weekend fishing trips were the worst. Every other Saturday he'd load up his gear and head out to meet his buddies. "Fish are really biting lately," he'd say with a grin. I'd watch him drive away, wondering if he even owned a fishing rod anymore. Before finding that receipt, I hadn't connected these dots. Now they formed a picture I couldn't unsee. The thought I'd been avoiding burst to the surface. John had a mistress. I tried to shake it off. This was John, my John. The man who held my hand through 20 hours of labor. The guy who surprised me with flowers on random Tuesdays. He wouldn't cheat. But the doubt gnawed at me. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I'd lie awake, listening to John's steady breathing, wondering if he was dreaming of her. One sleepless night, I found myself scrolling through Facebook. A name caught my eye: Mike Thompson. We'd gone to high school together, and I vaguely remembered he'd become a private investigator. Before I could talk myself out of it, I sent him a message. We met at a coffee shop across town the next day. I took a deep breath and spilled everything. The receipt, John's behavior, my suspicions. Mike listened without interrupting, his face neutral. Mike agreed to take the case. As I watched him leave, I felt a mix of relief and dread. Soon I'd have answers, but did I really want them? The next 3 weeks were the hardest of my life. I went through the motions, smiling at my patients, helping Sophie with her schoolwork, making small talk with John over dinner. But inside, I was a mess. Every time my phone buzzed, I'd jump, thinking it was Mike with news. Every time John came home late, I'd search his face for signs of guilt. Every time Sophie mentioned her dad, I'd wonder if she knew something I didn't. "You okay, Mom?" Sophie asked one evening, catching me staring blankly at the wall. "You seem off." I plastered on a smile. "Just tired, sweetie. Lots of clients this week." She didn't look convinced, but she let it go. I felt a pang of guilt for lying to her, but what could I say? Your dad might be cheating on me, and I've hired someone to spy on him. John, caught up in whatever or whoever was occupying his time, didn't seem to notice anything amiss. Part of me was relieved, part of me was furious that he could be so oblivious to my pain. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was between clients when my phone buzzed. Mike's name flashed on the screen, and my heart leapt into my throat. "Hannah? Can we meet?" His voice was neutral, giving nothing away. We agreed to meet at the same coffee shop in an hour. The rest of my appointments were a blur. I went through the motions, smiling and nodding at my clients while my mind raced. Mike was already there when I arrived, a thick manila envelope on the table in front of him. My stomach dropped at the sight of it. Hannah, Mike pushed the envelope towards me. "It's all in here. Photos, dates, locations. I'm sorry, Hannah, but your suspicions were right." With shaking hands, I opened the envelope. The first photo hit me like a punch to the gut. John, my John, with his arms around a younger woman. They were laughing, looking into each other's eyes with unmistakable affection. "Who is she?" I managed to choke out. "Alicia Benson," Mike replied. "She's 28, works at John's company. She's the director's daughter." I flipped through more photos. John and Alicia at restaurants, walking in the park, boarding a yacht. Each image was a fresh wound. "They've been seeing each other for over a year," Mike continued. "From what I've gathered, it's serious. They've talked about a future together." I nodded numbly, barely registering his words. Then a photo made me gasp. It showed John and Alicia at a cafe, but they weren't alone. Sitting with them, smiling and laughing, was Sophie. "No," I whispered. "It can't be." Mike's voice was gentle. "I'm sorry, Hannah, but Sophie knows about the affair. She's met with them several times. Those weekends she said she was with friends? She was with them on Alicia's yacht. There's more. John and Alicia have been buying Sophie expensive gifts. Designer clothes. Jewelry. I think they're trying to buy her silence." I don't remember the drive home. Thankfully, the house was empty when I arrived. I moved on autopilot, packing a small suitcase with clothes and essentials. I couldn't stay here, couldn't face John or Sophie. I checked into a hotel across town, my mind still reeling. Once in my room, I called my boss at the clinic and took 2 weeks off, unpaid. Family emergency. I turned off my phone and sank onto the bed. The envelope seemed to mock me from the bedside table. Unable to help myself, I opened it again. Sleep eluded me that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those damning photos. Sophie's smile as she hugged Alicia. John's arm around them both. My anger, which had started as a slow simmer, began to boil over. For years, I'd been the understanding one, the peacemaker, the one who bent over backwards to keep everyone happy. Well, I was done with that. My eyes fell on my laptop. Without really thinking, I opened it and logged into my bank account. There it was, Sophie's college fund. I'd been squirreling away money for years, determined to give her the best education possible. It was my way of showing love, even when she pushed me away. Now, looking at that balance, all I could think about was how Sophie had betrayed me. How she'd lied to my face, spent time with that woman, accepted her gifts. My daughter, who I'd sacrificed so much for, had stabbed me in the back. Suddenly, a memory surfaced. Years ago, before Sophie was born, I dreamed of opening my own cosmetology office. But then life happened: marriage, a baby, mortgage payments. My dream got pushed aside. I stared at the account balance. It was enough. Enough to start over, to finally pursue my own dreams instead of everyone else's. You know what I said out loud to the empty hotel room? Screw it. This money isn't for Sophie anymore. It's for me. The words hung in the air, both terrifying and exhilarating. For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. I had a future, even if it wasn't the one I'd planned. Emotionally drained, I finally drifted off to sleep, my phone still turned off. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains. For a blissful moment, I forgot everything. Then reality came crashing back. With a deep breath, I turned on my phone. It immediately exploded with notifications. Missed calls from John and Sophie. Voicemails. Text messages asking where I was, if I was okay. Their concern, which once would have melted my heart, now felt like acid in my veins. How dare they pretend to care now? I didn't bother listening to the voicemails or reading the texts. Instead, I got dressed, packed my bag, and checked out of the hotel. It was time to face the music. The drive home felt surreal. Part of me wanted to keep driving, to disappear and start a new life somewhere else. But I squashed that impulse. I needed closure. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw John's car and Sophie's bike. They were both home. Good. I walked in, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor. John and Sophie rushed out of the living room, their faces a mix of relief and anxiety. "Hannah, where have you been?" "We've been so worried," John exclaimed, moving to hug me. Sophie chimed in, her voice shrill with concern. "Mom, are you okay? Why didn't you answer our calls?" I stepped back, avoiding John's embrace. A cold laugh escaped me, stopping them both in their tracks. Without a word, I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder. I tossed it on the coffee table, photos spilling out. John and Sophie stared at the images, their faces draining of color. There they were, in glossy 8x10s, John with Alicia, Sophie with them both. The silence that followed my revelation was deafening. John was the first to recover, his shock morphing into defensive anger. "Hannah, it's not what you think," he started, his voice placating. "Alicia and I were just friends, and Sophie, she..." "Don't you dare drag Sophie into your lies," I cut him off, my voice ice cold. Sophie jumped in, her eyes wide with feigned innocence. "Mom, please, I can explain. I only met her a few times, I didn't know." I held up a hand, silencing them both. "Save it, I know everything. The yacht trips, the expensive gifts, the dinners. Every lie, every betrayal." They exchanged a look, and I saw the moment they realized their act wasn't working. The mask slipped away, revealing the strangers beneath. John's face hardened, all pretense of remorse vanishing. "Fine," he said coldly. "You want the truth? Yes, I'm with Alicia. She's young, beautiful, and rich. She makes me feel alive in a way you haven't in years." His words were like a slap to the face, but I refused to flinch. Instead, I turned to Sophie, waiting for her contribution to this character assassination. She didn't disappoint. "Alicia is amazing, Mom," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "She's successful, stylish, fun, not strict and boring like you." I absorbed their words, each one a fresh wound. But I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me cry. "I see," I said, my voice steady. "Well, let me tell you both something. John, I want a divorce. I'll have my lawyer contact you." John's eyes widened, but before he could speak, I turned to Sophie. "And you, young lady. You can forget about me paying for your college tuition. If Alicia is so amazing, maybe she can foot the bill." Sophie's jaw dropped. "What? You can't do that. That's my money. I've been counting on it. I want to get into my dream school." "Should have thought about that before you stabbed me in the back," I replied, unmoved by her crocodile tears. "Mom, please," she sobbed, her cool demeanor crumbling. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean what I said. Please forgive me. I need that money." But her earlier words echoed in my mind. Strict, boring. Worse than the other woman. Ignoring their protests, I went upstairs and packed the rest of my belongings. As I came back down, suitcase in hand, John blocked my path. "Hannah, let's talk about this rationally," he said, his tone businesslike. "The house, our assets." "My lawyer will be in touch," I interrupted, pushing past him. "I'm done talking to you." The next few weeks passed in a blur. I found a small apartment and threw myself into the logistics of dismantling a 20-year marriage. I hired a lawyer and requested a mediator, determined to handle this divorce as cleanly as possible. The last thing I wanted was a drawn-out, messy court battle. Sophie called incessantly at first. When I didn't pick up, she resorted to texts, then emails. Each message was a mix of apology and demand. I read each one, my heart breaking anew every time. But I couldn't bring myself to respond. The wound was too fresh, the betrayal too deep. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself staring at my phone, Sophie's number on the screen. My finger would hover over the call button, a war raging inside me. Part of me yearned to hear her voice, to believe her apologies. But then I'd remember her cruel words, her secret meetings with John and Alicia, and I'd put the phone down. Days turned into weeks. Each meeting with John was a test of endurance, conducted in the sterile environment of our lawyers' offices. The man I once loved was now just another face across the conference table, all business and cold efficiency. One day, as I settled into my usual chair, the door opened and Sophie walked in behind John. My heart clenched at the sight of her, but her expression stopped any warm feelings cold. She looked at me with a mixture of condescension and triumph that took my breath away. "Hello, Mother," she said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "I hope you don't mind me joining today." Before I could respond, she continued, "I just wanted to let you know that I won't be needing your pathetic money after all. Alicia has generously offered to pay for my education at any top college in the States." She paused, clearly savoring the moment. "Oh, and I'll be living with Dad and Alicia from now on. We're going to be one big, happy family." I felt the eyes of our lawyers and the mediator on me, waiting for my reaction. But I was too tired, too drained to feel much of anything anymore. I simply shrugged. "If that's what you want, Sophie," I said, my voice flat, "I hope you'll be happy." Something flickered in her eyes, disappointment. Had she been hoping for a bigger reaction? But it was gone in an instant, replaced by that same smug look. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur of legal jargon and asset division. In the end, John and I split everything down the middle. The house would be sold, with the proceeds divided equally between us. With my share from the house sale and the money I'd saved for Sophie's college fund, I had enough to make a fresh start. I found a small but cozy apartment and, after much soul-searching, decided to take a leap of faith. I quit my job at the clinic and threw myself into creating a business plan for my own cosmetology office. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. All those years of experience, all the dreams I'd put on hold, it was time to put them to use. Weeks of planning, renovating, and nervous anticipation followed. But finally, Hannah's Beauty Haven opened its doors. Those first few months were a whirlwind of long hours, social media marketing blitzes, and the slow but steady growth of my client base. In quiet moments, usually late at night when the day's work was done, I'd find myself scrolling through social media. Sophie's posts would appear on my feed, pictures of her in designer clothes, lounging on Alicia's yacht, always smiling, always looking carefree and happy. Each image was a knife to my heart. I'd wonder if she ever thought of me, if she missed me at all. When her 18th birthday rolled around, I sent her a message wishing her well. Same for her high school graduation. Both went unanswered. A year had passed since the divorce, and life had settled into a new rhythm. My cosmetology office, once just a dream, was now a thriving reality. The steady stream of loyal clients from my clinic days, combined with a growing number of new faces, kept me busier than I'd ever been. I'd even hired 2 assistants to help manage the workload. On a sunny Tuesday afternoon, as I was finishing up with a client, my phone buzzed. It was my cousin, Sarah. "Hannah, you won't believe what I just saw," she said, her voice a mix of concern and disbelief. "I was at the Meadowbrook supermarket, you know, the one on the other side of town, and I swear I saw Sophie working at the checkout." My heart skipped a beat. "Sophie? Are you sure?" "Positive." She looked different, thinner, tired, but it was definitely her. I thanked Sarah and hung up, my mind reeling. Sophie, working at a supermarket. What about college? What about Alicia's promise to fund her education? That night, after closing the office, I did something I hadn't done in months. I looked up Sophie's social media. What I found shocked me. All her glamorous photos with John and Alicia were gone. There were no updates, no college move-in pictures, nothing. Her once active profile was a digital ghost town. For days I wrestled with what to do. Part of me wanted to rush to the supermarket to demand answers. But another part, the part still nursing the wounds of betrayal, held me back. Finally, on my day off, I couldn't take it anymore. I drove to the Meadowbrook supermarket, my heart pounding as I walked through the automatic doors. And there she was, Sophie, my baby girl, looking so different from the confident young woman who'd sneered at me in the lawyer's office. She was thin, almost gaunt, dark circles under her eyes as she mechanically scanned items at the checkout. Our eyes met, and I saw a flash of something. Embarrassment? Shame? Before I could decipher it, she looked away, her cheeks flushing. I approached her checkout, my steps hesitant. "Sophie." She glanced up, then quickly back down at the register. "What do you want?" Her voice was harsh, defensive. "I'd like to talk. Maybe we could get coffee after your shift." "I don't want to talk to you," she snapped, still not meeting my eyes. "Please leave." "Sophie, please." I said leave. She finally looked at me, her eyes blazing with a mix of anger and something else. Was it fear? Stunned by her vehemence, I backed away. Other customers were starting to stare. With a heavy heart, I left the supermarket, climbing into my car with shaking hands. As I drove home, my mind was a whirlwind of questions. What had happened? Where were John and Alicia? Why wasn't Sophie in college? For days after, I waited for a call, a text, anything. But my phone remained stubbornly silent. I thought about going back to the supermarket, but Sophie's words rang in my ears. "I don't want to talk to you." Just as I was beginning to lose hope, my phone rang. An unknown number flashed on the screen. With a mix of trepidation and curiosity, I answered. Mom. Sophie's voice, small and uncertain, came through the speaker. "Can we meet, please?" We agreed to meet at a small cafe near my office. As I waited, my mind raced with possibilities. When Sophie walked in, my breath caught. She looked so different from the glowing, confident girl in those yacht photos, so much older than her years. We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of unsaid words hanging between us. Finally, Sophie spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry, Mom, for everything." And then, like a dam breaking, the story poured out of her. At first, living with John and Alicia had been a dream. Designer clothes, yacht trips, promises of a bright future. But the honeymoon period didn't last. Alicia started making comments, Sophie said, her eyes fixed on her untouched coffee. Little digs about how much space I took up, how expensive I was. Then she told Dad I couldn't live with them anymore, that there was no money for college. I gasped. But your father? Surely he didn't agree. Sophie's bitter laugh was answer enough. He said I was an adult now, that I needed to stand on my own 2 feet. They kicked me out, Mom. I had nowhere to go. Why didn't you call me? I asked, reaching for her hand across the table. She pulled away, tears in her eyes. I was so ashamed. And then I realized, this must be how you felt when we betrayed you. I couldn't face you after that. My heart broke for her, even as a small, petty part of me whispered, "Good. Now she knows how it feels." I'm sharing a crappy apartment with a coworker, Sophie continued. The supermarket job barely covers rent and food. I feel so useless. I wanted to wrap her in my arms, to tell her everything would be okay. But I knew it wasn't that simple. "Sophie," I said gently, "I'm so sorry you're going through this, but you're right, you did betray me. Actions have consequences, and this is something you need to work through." We both cried then, mourning the lost year, the broken trust, the pain we'd caused each other. As we parted, something had shifted between us. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. That night I tossed and turned, Sophie's story playing on repeat in my mind. By morning I'd made a decision. I called Sophie. "I have a proposition for you," I said. "I need an administrator at my office. The pay's not great, but it's better than the supermarket. And maybe we can start rebuilding from there." There was a long pause. Then, "Yes, I'd like that. Thank you, Mom." It's been 6 months since that day. Sophie works at my office now, learning the business from the ground up. She's saving for community college, determined to make it on her own merit this time. Our relationship is a work in progress. There are good days and bad days, moments of connection and moments of tension. The trust we once had is slowly, painstakingly being rebuilt, one day at a time. As I watch Sophie greet a client with a warm smile, I feel a glimmer of hope. We're not the same people we were before the betrayal, the divorce, the year of silence. But maybe, just maybe, we can be something new, something stronger.
My name's Lana, just a regular girl who ended up pouring drinks at Joe's bar downtown after high school. It wasn't anything fancy, but it paid the bills and kept me busy. That's where I first laid eyes on Daniel. It was a Thursday night, the kind where the bar was buzzing but not too packed, just how I like it. In walked this guy, Daniel, with a few of his buddies. Right off, he stuck out. Not because he was loud or anything, he was the calm kind, the kind that had an easy smile and a look in his eyes that said he knew something you didn't. He sauntered over to the bar and took a seat right in front of where I was working. "Hey," he said, flashing that grin. "What's good here, besides the view?" I shot him a look. "Beer's cold, if that's what you mean," I replied, not letting on that I caught his cheeky compliment. His laugh was genuine, and it made me smile despite myself. "I'll take one then, and whatever you recommend for yourself. Let's make it 2, he added. Pouring the drinks, I couldn't help but notice the way he watched me, not in a creepy way, but like he was actually interested in what I was doing. "So, you come here often?" I joked as I handed him the beers. "First time, actually. My friend said this place has the best service in town." "Guess they were right," Daniel said, his eyes not leaving mine. We chatted more than I usually did with customers. He told me about his college days, all fancy and full of big words I didn't bother to remember. And I told him about growing up here in town, how I always thought I'd do something more but never figured out what that more was. "You're interesting, Lana," he said out of the blue. "Not like the usual crowd in here." I raised an eyebrow. "Thanks, I guess. You're not too bad yourself, for a rich boy." He laughed again, that sound that filled up the space around us. Rich boy, huh? Trust me, having money's not all it's cracked up to be. We got interrupted then by his friends, who were ready to move on to some club or another. He stood up, tossed a 50 on the bar, way too much for 2 beers, and winked. Maybe I'll find that right company if I come back here. And just like that, he was gone, melting into the crowd with his friends. But something about him lingered, like the echo of his laugh in my ears, making me wonder if I'd see him again. Daniel started showing up at the bar every single night after that first encounter. At first, I figured he was just like any other guy, killing time with a beer and small talk. But then, the talks got longer and a whole lot more personal. He'd settle into his usual spot, and as I wiped down the counter or restocked the shelves, he'd tell me bits and pieces about his life, his family. My dad's pretty big into politics, he'd say with a casual shrug, like he was talking about the weather, not dropping that his father was one of the state's top politicians. And Mom, well, she's a housewife, keeps everything running smooth at home. The more we talked, the more I saw past the polished surface. Sure, he had money and a name that opened doors, but there was something else, something real that I couldn't quite put my finger on. And despite my better judgment, I found myself looking forward to those evenings when he'd show up. One night, it all changed. He came in looking serious, his usual smile nowhere in sight. "Lana, I've been thinking," he started, hesitating a bit. "How about we go out tomorrow? Somewhere nice, not just here." It was sudden, but not unwelcome. "Like a date?" I asked, trying to sound cool but feeling my heart thump a little harder. "Yeah, a date," he confirmed, his smile back as if he'd won some sort of victory seeing my reaction. That date led to another and another. Before I knew it, we were seeing each other every day. Daniel talked about his life, and I shared mine. He'd laugh off the differences, saying, "Wealth's my only drawback, you know." But it wasn't just his wealth. Daniel loved the high life, parties, late nights, the kind of leisure I could hardly imagine. He brushed off my concerns with a wave. "Things will change, Lana. You'll see." Then came the night he wanted me to meet his parents. I was a bundle of nerves. We drove up to their mansion, the kind of place you see in movies, with sprawling gardens and more rooms than you'd know what to do with. His mother, Mrs. Patricia Gilmore, was as chilly as the marble floors, sizing me up like I was something she'd found stuck to her shoe. "A waitress," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Really, Daniel, you expect her to fit into our world?" His father, Gerald Gilmore, however, beamed at me as if I was the first honest thing he'd seen in years. "Lana, dear, it's refreshing to see someone from real life. You're just what we need. A bridge to the common man, right before the elections." I didn't know whether to be flattered or offended. The dinner was tense, Mrs. Gilmore sniping comments under her breath, Mr. Gilmore countering with grand declarations about my refreshing simplicity. At one point, Mrs. Gilmore had enough, standing up so fast her chair almost toppled over. "I will not stand for this," she hissed, storming out of the room. Mr. Gilmore just winked at me across the table. "Don't you worry, Lana. Everything will be just fine." That wink was supposed to reassure me, but it felt like I was being swept into a game I didn't know how to play. Weeks later, Daniel got down on one knee, right there in the bar where we first met, with the same cheeky grin he had that first night. "Marry me, Lana, and let's show them all how it's done," he said. And I, lost in the moment and in him, said yes. The wedding was anything but the quiet affair I'd hoped for. From the moment Daniel popped the question, his father took over the whole show. He insisted on a grand ceremony, one that would be talked about far and wide. "It'll be perfect for the campaign," he'd say with a sly grin, every time I brought up keeping things small. So, there I was, standing in a dress fancier than anything I'd ever owned, with cameras flashing in my face as I tried to keep my smile from faltering. The reporters swarmed around us, and Mr. Gilmore relished every moment, playing the gracious father-in-law to perfection. "See, folks, this is what real love looks like. Unity across different worlds," he announced to the cameras, slinging his arm around me a little too tightly. I glanced over at my parents, sitting off to the side, their expressions a mix of awe and discomfort. They weren't used to this kind of spectacle, and frankly, neither was I. Mrs. Gilmore, decked out in a dress that probably cost more than my dad's car, pasted on a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She leaned in during the photo op, whispering through clenched teeth, "Smile, Lana. Today, we're all family." After the spectacle, Daniel and I moved into a luxury apartment, a stark contrast to my modest childhood home. It was a wedding gift from his parents, lavish and sprawling, located in one of the city's most exclusive buildings. Daniel's nights out with his friends became more frequent, and I found myself alone in our expansive living space more often than not. His mother, Mrs. Gilmore, took it upon herself to drop by unannounced, always with a critique ready at her lips. One such afternoon, she found me trying to straighten up the mess from one of Daniel's late-night gatherings. She surveyed the room with a disdainful eye before fixing her gaze on me. "Lana, this isn't some roadside diner. You need to keep a better eye on Daniel. Look at him, he's out all the time, drinking, and it's your job to rein him in." I bristled at her words, my hands clenching the dishcloth tighter. "And what exactly do you suggest I do, Mrs. Gilmore? Chain him to a chair?" Her lips thinned into a line. "Don't be smart, Lana. You need to take control. Otherwise, you're just as much to blame." The air was tense between us, the only sounds the soft tick of the expensive clock on the wall and the distant hum of city life outside the windows. That night, when Daniel came home, I tried to talk to him about it. "Your mom thinks I'm not doing enough to keep you in line," I said, trying to keep my voice even. Daniel's reaction was immediate and heated. "You gonna listen to her? Let's not let her get between us, okay? I love you, Lana. We'll figure this out together." But as the weeks rolled on, nothing changed. Daniel's assurances felt more and more hollow, and I found myself questioning whether love was enough to bridge the chasm that seemed to be widening between us. Living the high life wasn't all it was cracked up to be, not by a long shot. I found myself constantly tidying our massive apartment, cooking meals that often went cold before Daniel got home, and hustling laundry to and from the cleaners, all while holding down my shifts at Joe's bar. Meanwhile, Daniel, with no job on his horizon, seemed content to blow through his hefty allowance on nights out with his friends. Daniel's mother, the queen of high society gossip, made sure everyone knew her twisted version of our life. According to her, I was the villain, a dumb, greedy woman who led her poor son astray with my low-class ways. It was a normal day at the bar when she decided to bring her highfalutin friends for a casual lunch. The moment they strutted in, I knew I was in for it. They perched at the bar, their noses turned up like they smelled something foul. Mrs. Gilmore waved me over with a flick of her wrist, her voice loud enough to turn a few heads. "Lana, darling, could you hurry up? We don't have all day, and we expect proper service even in this establishment." Her friends snickered, their eyes scanning the bar with barely disguised contempt. I forced a smile, taking their orders while my hands itched to dump a tray of drinks right into their laps. "Make sure the glasses are clean, dear. We wouldn't want to catch anything," one of her cronies quipped, her laughter sharp as shattered glass. "Yes, ma'am," I replied, my tone syrupy sweet. I delivered their drinks and food with a smile plastered on, though inside I felt anything but cheerful. As I passed by with another order, Mrs. Gilmore grabbed my arm, her grip tight. "You know, Lana, it's a shame you don't use your husband's money to better yourself." Maybe some classes in etiquette? Or a seminar on how to be a supportive wife? I pulled away gently, keeping my voice steady. I appreciate the advice, Mrs. Gilmore. I'll give it all the consideration it deserves. The bar couldn't close fast enough that day. Each comment, each condescending look from that table, added weight to the growing dread that this was my life now, scrutinized and scorned, no matter how hard I tried. Back at our apartment, the silence was a stark contrast to the chaos at the bar. Daniel was out again, the note on the fridge a weak apology for missing dinner. I was left alone with my thoughts, which were as cluttered as the untouched plates on our dining table. Meanwhile, I started paying the bills from my own tips because Daniel's idea of budgeting was seeing how quickly he could spend his money each month. Groceries, utilities, even the damn cable bill, I covered them all. His promises to get his act together and find a job were as empty as our conversations. The election season was in full swing, and Mr. Gilmore was more eager than ever to parade me around at every possible public event. He'd introduce me with great fanfare, always emphasizing how his son had married a simple girl from the people. At rallies, dinners, and interviews, I wore my smile like a mask, nodding and playing the part of the approachable daughter-in-law. But behind the smiles and the polite applause, I was weary. The constant scrutiny, the endless small talk with people who cared more about my story as a campaign tool than as a person, it was exhausting. More than once, I found myself eyeing the exits at these events, longing for nothing more than to run out and never look back. One evening, after yet another fundraiser that had stretched on for hours, Mr. Gilmore pulled me aside, his hand gripping my shoulder a little too firmly. "Lana, I need you to keep this up. You know, your cooperation is crucial. Remember, your lifestyle, this apartment, it's all thanks to our support." I nodded, the thread in his tone clear as glass. "Of course, Mr. Gilmore. I understand." It wasn't just the campaign that was putting pressure on me. Things at home were no better. Daniel's behavior had escalated from neglect to outright destructiveness. He'd come home late, if he came home at all, often drunk and sometimes barely able to stand. Then came the night that changed everything. Daniel stumbled through the door well past midnight, his face ashen, eyes wild with panic. He collapsed onto the sofa, his hands shaking. "Lana, I've screwed up," he blurted out, his voice a hoarse whisper. "I owe money, a lot of money. To some really bad people. I lost it at the casino, and they're not the type to wait for their cash." My stomach twisted at his words. "How much?" "70,000, he murmured, looking away. I felt cold all over. $70,000? He nodded, miserable. "I need your help, Lana. Please, I can't ask my parents. They'd disown me." The desperation in his eyes was something I couldn't ignore. He grabbed my hands, his grip tight. "I swear, Lana, if you help me with this, I'll change. I know I've been a terrible husband, but I'll do anything to make this right. Please." Something in me broke then. Despite the anger and the disappointment, I couldn't let him face this alone. "Okay, Daniel. I'll help you. But this is it. You have to turn things around." I took out a loan the next day, $70,000 that felt like a noose around my neck. But as I handed the money over, Daniel was like a man reborn. He helped around the house, cut back on the drinking, and for a brief, fleeting moment, I let myself believe that we could actually make this work. We spent evenings together, talking about plans for the future, even daring to dream about starting a family. Daniel was attentive, helping with chores, sharing meals at the same table, things we hadn't done in years. "Maybe we should think about having a kid," he suggested one night as we cleaned up after dinner. I looked at him, surprised but not unhappy at the thought. Really? You think we're ready? He smiled, pulling me close. Yeah, I do. I mean, we're getting back on track, right? A fresh start. I wanted to believe him, to believe in us. And in those moments, it was easy to imagine that everything could actually be okay, that the debts and lies were behind us. But that illusion shattered the night I came home from a double shift at the bar. Tossing my keys on the counter, I headed for the bedroom, my body aching for just a few hours of sleep before doing it all over again. But the scene I walked into snapped me wide awake. Daniel was passed out on our bed, snoring loudly, with two girls I'd never seen before curled up beside him, both just as unconscious. Bottles and glasses littered the nightstand, the stench of alcohol heavy in the air. My heart hammered against my ribcage as a cold rage settled in my gut. Without thinking, I pulled out my phone and started recording. The camera's light cut through the darkness, capturing the damning scene. I nudged Daniel awake, my voice sharp. "Daniel, who are these girls?" He blinked up at me, confused and still drunk, then waved a dismissive hand as if brushing away the question. "They're just my girlfriends, you know? It's not a big deal. We do this sometimes when you're at work." That was it. The final betrayal. I stopped the recording, my hands trembling with a cocktail of emotions, rage, sorrow, disbelief. I stepped out of the room, dialed Mr. Gilmore, and waited for him to pick up. "Lana? What's wrong?" His voice was cautious, alert. "Mr. Gilmore, I'm done. I just caught Daniel in our bed with two other women. I've recorded everything, and I want a divorce," I said, each word measured, heavy with finality. He was at the apartment within the hour, his face a mask of controlled fury as he glanced at the still unconscious figures in my bed. Daniel had woken up by then, looking sheepish and scared as his father berated him in hushed, vicious tones. "You idiot! Look what you've done!" Turning to me, Mr. Gilmore's tone softened. "Lana, I'll handle this. Let's keep it quiet, for everyone's sake. What do you need?" $500,000, the apartment sold and the money transferred to me, and the loan I took out for him cleared, I stated, each demand non-negotiable. Mr. Gilmore nodded slowly, calculating. "Done. But you must agree to keep this quiet. Move away, start fresh somewhere else. Can you do that?" "Yes," I said simply. There was nothing left for me here, no reason to stay. "And Lana, don't tell his mother. She'd make a scene, and we can't afford that now, not with the elections." The divorce papers came through quietly. I signed them in the dim light of dawn, alone. Mr. Gilmore kept his word. The money was in my account within days, the loan was paid off, and I was free from Daniel and his destructive whims. Settling into my new life in another city felt like breathing fresh air after being submerged underwater for too long. The day I moved into my new apartment in a peaceful neighborhood, I knew I had made the right decision. It was smaller than the luxurious prison I'd left behind, but it was all mine. The first thing I did after unpacking was block every number associated with my old life. Every ring was a potential drag back into that mess, and I wasn't about to let that happen. Then, I went out and bought myself a car. Nothing too fancy, but sleek and new, something just for me. A few days later, I landed a job as an administrator at a local restaurant. It was a step up from waitressing, with regular hours and no late nights. The owner, a wiry woman named Carla, with a sharp tongue and a no-nonsense attitude, took me under her wing. "You new to town?" Carla asked on my first day, eyeing me with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Yeah, just moved in," I replied, keeping my past tucked away like the folded boxes in my closet. Carla nodded, as if approving my concise answer. "Well, here's your desk, and here are your responsibilities. You keep things running smooth. and we'll get along just fine. I appreciate it, Carla. I won't let you down, I promised, eager to prove my worth in this new role. The job was busy, filled with the usual chaos of restaurant life, but I thrived on the structure it brought to my days. I was making my own money, controlling my own fate. It felt good, honest, and real. Encouraged by Carla's blunt but fair management style, I decided to enroll in the local college. I wanted more than just to escape my past, I wanted to build something lasting. Night classes in business management seemed like the right path, and stepping into the classroom, I felt a surge of pride. I was doing this for me, no one else. One evening, as I was locking up the restaurant, Carla stopped by my desk. Heard you're hitting the books at night. That's good. Keep that brain working. I smiled, grateful for her recognition. Trying to. Figured it's never too late to start fresh, right? Damn right, Carla said with a nod. You ever need help, you let me know. I know a thing or two about keeping a business above water. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Work, study, and the quiet solitude of my apartment. I relished the normalcy, the mundane moments that I used to take for granted. It was during one of these quiet nights, sitting on my balcony with a cup of tea, that I realized just how much I had changed. The city lights sparkled in the distance, each one a reminder of where I'd been and where I was heading. 2 years had slipped by since I cut all ties with my old life and started anew. I was sitting in my living room, cozy and warm, a book forgotten on my lap, when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, and hesitating for a split second, I answered. Lana, this is Patricia Gilmore. The voice came through, high-pitched and frantic. Daniel is in trouble because of your negligence. I was taken aback. Mrs. Gilmore, slow down. What are you talking about? What trouble? She was nearly breathless with agitation. An unknown friend of Daniel called me. He said Daniel got into a fight with a policeman in a bar. I had to transfer money to keep him out of jail. I took it from our savings, and Gerald doesn't know yet. Why weren't you there for him? Mrs. Gilmore, listen to me very carefully, I said, my voice calm and clear. Daniel and I have been divorced for 2 years. I haven't seen or spoken to him since. There was a pause, and then, divorced? What are you talking about? Why didn't anyone tell me? You didn't know because it was meant to be kept quiet for the family's sake, for the election and all. I'm sorry you were left out, but I am no longer part of Daniel's life or your family. And what happened to the policeman and Daniel? Her voice cracked, and I could hear the confusion and fear seeping through. Laughing softly, I tried to find some humor in the absurdity of the situation. Mrs. Gilmore, you've been scammed. There's no doubt about it. These scammers probably made up the whole story about the policeman just to trick you out of your money. There was a pause on the line as the realization sank in. Her voice quivered, fear replacing the anger from moments before. Scammed? Oh no, what have I done? Her tone was frantic, the weight of her mistake crashing down. Can't you just lend me some money to put back before Gerald finds out? Please, Lana. Mrs. Gilmore, I can't. It's not my place anymore. I've moved on. You need to handle this with your family, I replied, firm yet not unkind. Her crying intensified, then turned to anger. You could help, but you choose not to. You're just as selfish as everyone said. I sighed, a deep, weary release. I'm sorry you feel that way. I truly hope you sort this out, but I must go now. I hung up before she could reply, her sobs echoing in my ear even after the line went dead. Looking around my peaceful apartment, the stark contrast between my current life and the chaos of the past made me shudder. I picked up my phone again, this time navigating through the settings to block yet another number. As I set the phone down, a sense of finality washed over me. I was truly free now, no longer entangled in the web of deception and greed that had once defined my life.